In a small village cradled by the banks of a gentle winding river, two girls named Lamy and Adah grew up side by side, their friendship a thread woven into the fabric of their lives from the moment they could toddle across the dusty ground. They were inseparable, a pair as constant as the sun rising over the thatched roofs each morning. Together they'd set out at dawn, clay pots perched atop their heads, making their way to the stream that cut through the land like a silver ribbon. The water was cool and clear, and they'd fill their pots slowly, chatting about the little things that filled their days, whose goat had wandered off, or which elder had told the funniest story by the fire the night before. Their laughter would bounce off the trees as they walked back, careful not to spill a drop, their steps light despite the weight they carried. When the village held its festivals, they'd join the throng in the open square, where the air thrummed, with the beat of drums and the scent of roasted yams hung thick. Hand in hand they'd dance, their feet kicking up clouds of red earth, their movements free and joyful under the gaze of neighbors who smiled at their energy. At night, when the moon climbed high and painted the world in soft silver, they'd sneak away from their homes to sit beneath its glow, finding a quiet spot by the river or under a sprawling tree. There they'd whisper secrets, dreams of what might come, fears they didn't dare speak in daylight, their voices blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. Lamy was the thinker of the two, her mind sharp and quick, always ready with a clever fix for any trouble that crossed their path. If a basket tore, she'd weave it back together with nimble fingers. If a friend lost a trinket, she'd figure out where it had rolled. Adah, though, had a different gift. She carried a gentle warmth, a beauty that wasn't just in her face but in the way she moved through the world, her smile a spark that lifted the spirits of everyone around her. The villagers often said she had a heart as big as the sky, and it showed in how she'd stop to help a child tie a sandal or share a handful of berries with someone hungry. As the years rolled by, turning them from girls into young women, their paths began to shift, pulled by forces neither could have foreseen. Adah's grace caught more than just the eyes of their neighbors. It reached the heart of King Obi, the young ruler who held sway over their land and beyond. He was a man built of quiet power, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of leadership, his voice deep and steady, commanding respect without ever needing to shout. Yet there was a softness to him, too, a kindness that flickered in his dark eyes, a warmth that made people trust him. It happened one afternoon during a festival, the village alive with color and sound, women in bright wraps twirling, men drumming, children darting through the crowd with sticky hands from honeyed treats. Obi had come to join his people, standing tall among them, when he saw Adah. She was dancing, her steps light and sure, her laughter rising above the music like a melody of its own. Something about her stopped him, held him still in the chaos of the celebration, and in that moment, he knew she was the one he wanted beside him. By evening, he'd made up his mind. With no delay, he gathered gifts, bolts of fine cloth, sacks of grain, a woven mat dyed in rich hues, and went to her family's home, a modest hut with walls of packed mud and a roof of dried palm. He spoke to her parents with respect, his words clear and earnest, asking for her hand in marriage, promising to care for her as his queen. Adah's mother and father listened, their faces softening with pride, and after a quiet nod from Adah herself, they agreed. Lamy was there too, lingering just outside the doorway, close enough to hear the exchange, to see the way Adah's eyes shone with a mix of shyness and excitement. She clapped her hands together, forcing a wide smile across her face, and told herself she was glad. Adah deserved this, didn't she? She repeated it in her head, over and over, trying to drown out the tiny, nagging feeling that prickled beneath her ribs, a feeling she didn't want to name. Time moved forward, and Adah slipped into her new life with a grace that seemed effortless. She traded her simple wraps for robes of deep blue threaded with gold, the kind that caught the sunlight and made her look like she belonged in the palace's grand halls. She'd walk through the village with Obi, her arm linked through his, greeting the people with that same warm smile, her voice bright as she laughed at his quiet jokes. Lamy watched it all from a distance, her own smile growing harder to hold, each time she saw them together. The sight of Adah in those fine clothes, her hand resting on Obi's, the way the villagers now bowed to her, it stirred something in Lamy's chest, a twist of longing she couldn't ignore. Whenever she heard Adah's laughter drifting from the palace, or caught a glimpse of her friend glowing with happiness, that twist sharpened, cutting deeper, until it had a name: envy. One warm afternoon, Adah came to see Lamy, stepping into the small hut where Lamy lived alone, its walls bare and its floor swept clean. She sat on a low stool, her royal robes brushing the ground, and looked at Lamy with eyes full of fondness. She said how much she missed their old days, the stream, the dances, the moonlight talks, and how the palace, for all its splendor, felt empty without Lamy there. She begged her friend to visit more, her voice soft and pleading, saying she needed her company to make it feel like home. Lamy nodded, her lips curving into another tight smile, and promised she'd try, her words polite but hollow. Inside, her heart burned, a slow fire she couldn't put out. She didn't want to say it aloud, didn't want to admit it even to herself. But seeing Adah so settled, so lifted by her new world, made Lamy's own life feel smaller, dimmer, like a shadow next to a flame. As the days turned into weeks, that fire grew, spreading through her thoughts until it consumed her. She started avoiding Adah, dodging her visits with excuses. She had to fetch water, mend a torn skirt, gather firewood from the edge of the village. She'd say she was too busy, her voice light, but the truth was heavier. She couldn't face Adah's joy anymore, couldn't stand the way it highlighted everything she didn't have. One night, lying awake on her woven mat, the dark pressing in around her, she stared at the ceiling where shadows flickered from a dying fire. A thought slipped into her mind, quiet at first, then louder, darker. She whispered it to herself, her voice so soft it barely broke the silence. Why should Adah have it all? The love, the wealth, the title, when she had nothing but this hut, this life? The question lingered, sinking roots into her mind, and soon it wasn't just a question, it was a plan. If Adah were gone, she thought, maybe she could step into that life, wear the robes, sit beside Obi, be the one the village looked to. It was a selfish idea, a cruel one, but it stuck to her, growing stronger each time she turned it over. Before long, it wasn't just an idea. It was something she'd do. She remembered the tales the elders told around the fire, stories of an old woman who lived deep in the forest, a figure cloaked in mystery. They said she had powers, could cast spells, grant wishes, change the course of things, but it always came with a cost, something you'd pay in ways you couldn't predict. Lamy didn't care about the price, her mind was made up. Before the first light of dawn touched the village, while the world still slept under a blanket of stars, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, slipped out her door, and started toward the woods. The forest was dense, its trees tall and twisted, their branches knitting together to shut out the sky. Strange noises filled the air, the sharp hoot of an owl overhead, the crunch of leaves under her feet, the faint growl of something lurking in the shadows. But she kept going, her heart thumping with a mix of fear and resolve. She walked for hours, her legs aching, her breath coming in short gasps, until at last she saw it. A small hut pieced together from sticks and dried leaves, smoke curling up from a hole in its roof, a sharp, unfamiliar smell drifting toward her. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer, her hands clenched tight. Outside the hut sat the old woman, just as the stories described, stirring a pot of green liquid that bubbled and steamed over a low fire. Her hair was long and tangled, falling over her shoulders in wild strands, and her eyes, when they lifted to meet Lamy's, were sharp, like they could see straight into her thoughts. She spoke in a voice that was soft but edged with something hard, asking what brought Lamy to her door. For a moment, Lamy hesitated, the weight of her words pressing against her tongue. But then she let them out, plain and direct. She wanted Adah gone, and she wanted to take her place as queen. The old woman tilted her head, one eyebrow arching, as she studied Lamy, then warned that such a wish was heavy, that it would bring consequences she might not be ready to face. Lamy shook her head, her voice firm, saying she didn't care, that she'd do whatever it took. The woman smiled then, a crooked smile that showed uneven, yellowed teeth, and reached into her hut. She pulled out a small bottle filled with the green liquid from her pot and handed it to Lamy, telling her to give it to Adah. It would turn her into something harmless, something no one would think twice about, she said. Lamy, her voice trembling, with a mix of nerves and excitement, asked what it would do. The woman's smile stretched wider as she answered. It would make Adah a fish, a small creature to swim in the river, far from the palace, forgotten by all who'd known her. Lamy took the bottle, her fingers shaking as they closed around it, and turned back toward the village, hurrying through the forest with her prize tucked close. When she got home, she hid it in a woven bag under her mat, waiting for the right moment. A few days later, Adah came by, her smile as bright as ever, her royal robes brushing the floor of Lamy's hut as she sat and talked. Lamy saw her chance. She poured the green liquid into a wooden cup, stirring it with care, and offered it to Adah, saying it was a special drink she'd made to keep her strong and happy, a little gift from one friend to another. Adah, trusting her completely, thanked her with that warm smile and drank it down in one long sip. The change came fast, almost too fast to believe. Adah's body shrank before Lamy's eyes, her arms vanishing, her legs melding into a long, scaly tail. In seconds, she was a small golden fish, its scales glinting in the dim light of the hut as it flopped on the floor. Lamy bent down, scooped it up in her hands and stared at it, the tiny creature that had been her friend. She whispered a quiet goodbye, her voice steady now, and carried it to the river. Standing at the edge, she tossed it into the water, watching it sink beneath the surface, convinced that soon Obi would forget Adah and turn to her instead. Days passed after Adah vanished, and the palace slipped into a strange, heavy stillness. Adah had been loved by all. The servants who'd known her gentle words, the villagers who'd felt her kindness when she'd shared food or mended a child's torn shirt, and her absence left a hole no one could fill. King Obi was shaken, his calm strength fraying as he sent out search parties across the land, men on foot and horseback combing the riverbanks, the fields, the hills beyond the village. They came back empty-handed, no trace of her anywhere. He poured everything into the search, calling on every resource he had, every guard, every tracker. But it led nowhere. At night, when he finally fell into a restless sleep, dreams came to plague him. In them, Adah stood by the river, her face pale and drawn, her eyes full of sorrow as she called his name, her voice echoing over the water, pleading for him to find her, to help her. The dreams grew sharper each night, so real he'd wake with his heart racing, certain she was out there, reaching for him from some unseen place. Lamy, meanwhile, went on as if nothing had changed, showing up at the palace often, sitting with Obi as he mourned. One day they were in the garden, the air thick with the scent of flowers, and she spoke to him softly, saying he had to move on, that the village needed a leader who could stand tall, that she could help him carry the weight, if he'd let her. Her words were smooth, her tone kind, but her heart was cold, her kindness a mask hiding what she'd done. Obi sighed, his eyes shadowed with a grief that wouldn't lift, and said Adah had been the light in his life, that without her, the palace felt like an empty shell. Lamy bit back her irritation, her efforts to pull him closer hitting the same wall again and again. He saw her as a friend, nothing more, no matter how hard she tried to shift his gaze. Weeks stretched into months, and whispers spread through the village like smoke. Some said Adah had run away, tired of palace life. Others muttered about something darker, though they had no proof. One evening, Lamy sat alone in her hut, the light of a single candle flickering against the walls. She stared into the flame, muttering to herself about why Obi still clung to Adah's memory when she was gone for good, why he didn't see her standing right there, ready to take her place. She should be queen by now, she thought, her patience wearing thin. Then an idea sparked. If she couldn't win him with words or time, maybe magic could do it. She remembered the old woman in the forest, the one who'd given her the potion to erase Adah. If she could remove her friend, surely she could bend Obi's heart too. At first light, she set out again, the forest as dark and wild as before, its trees looming over her, their branches twisting like bony fingers against the pale sky. The path was quiet, except for the crunch of leaves and twigs under her feet, the air thick with the damp smell of earth. When she reached the hut, smoke drifted from the chimney, and the old woman sat outside, grinding herbs into a stone bowl with slow, steady hands. She didn't look up as Lamy approached, her voice rough as she noted Lamy's quick return, warning that her last wish had already stirred trouble she couldn't undo. Lamy ignored the caution, her tone sharp as she demanded a charm to make. Obi love her. The woman let out a low, dry laugh and finally met her eyes, saying love couldn't be forced without a price, asking if Lamy would give up her womb, her chance to ever bear a child. Lamy froze, the question hitting her like a stone. She'd always imagined herself with children one day, little ones running around her feet, but the pull of power was stronger, the vision of herself crowned beside Obi drowning out everything else. She agreed, her voice steady though her hands shook, saying she'd pay anything. The woman grinned, her yellowed teeth flashing, and turned to a black pot, mixing herbs and powders with strange liquids until the air filled with a bitter, heavy smell. She handed Lamy a small vial of red liquid, instructing her to mix it into Obi's food. His heart would be hers forever, but her womb belonged to the spell now. Lamy took it, her fingers closing tight around the glass, and headed back, her mind buzzing with excitement and a thread of fear. At the palace, she went to the servants, her voice sweet as she asked to cook for Obi, saying she wanted to lift his spirits after so much sadness. They trusted her, saw her as his friend, and let her into the kitchen. She made a thick stew, stirring in the red liquid with care, and brought it to him herself, setting the bowl before him with a gentle smile, wishing him peace. He ate it all, unsuspecting, and the magic took hold fast. By the time he set the spoon down, his eyes softened, and he looked at her with a warmth she'd never seen before. He spoke her name, his voice low and kind, saying he'd never realized how much she meant to him, how she'd stayed by his side through everything. Lamy's heart surged, though she kept her face humble, promising she'd always be there. Within days, he announced they'd marry, and the palace buzzed with shock. Villagers whispered among themselves, stunned that he'd choose Adah's friend, so soon after she vanished. Adah's parents wept, their voices breaking as they asked how Lamy could take their daughter's place. But no one had proof of wrongdoing, and fear of Obi's authority kept them quiet. Lamy, now queen, walked the halls with her chin high, draped in robes of silk and gold, Obi's love wrapped around her like a cloak. Yet deep inside, a shadow lingered, a quiet unease she couldn't shake, a sense that something watched her from beyond the palace walls. By the river, a golden fish swam in endless circles, its eyes glinting with a purpose she couldn't see. That morning, the river shone under the rising sun, its surface calm and golden. Na, a widow worn thin by years of hardship, walked to its edge, a clay pot balanced on her head. Life had been a fight since her husband passed, every day a scramble to feed herself and her daughter, Cassie, but she held on to hope, praying softly for a break, a single blessing to ease their load. She knelt by the water, scooping it into her pot, her whispered words floating over the ripples. Back at their small hut on the village's fringe, she set the pot on a wooden stool and tipped it to pour into a basin, but her breath caught as a golden fish slid out, landing gently on the edge. Its scales sparkled like sunlight on water, a sight so strange she blinked to be sure it was real. She leaned closer, her heart pounding, and recognized it. The legendary golden fish, a creature from old tales said to appear once every 10 years, worth more than a farmer's yearly harvest to merchants and rich folk. Her hands trembled with a rush of excitement. This could end their struggles, a gift straight from her prayers. Just then, Cassie stepped inside, her arms full of firewood, her wide eyes catching her mother's stunned look. Na pointed to the fish and Cassie dropped the wood, rushing over, her jaw falling as she saw it gleam in the bowl. They stood together, marveling at it, Na explaining what it was, the golden fish from stories, a treasure that could make them rich. Casey's face lit up, her voice bubbling as she dreamed aloud of a big house with a proper roof, tables full of food, clothes that weren't patched a dozen times. Na smiled at her daughter's joy, her own heart swelling with hope, and gently lifted the fish into a clay bowl of water to keep it alive. She decided they'd take it to the market the next day, let the merchants bid until they had enough to change their lives. That night, they ate a little extra, a small celebration for what was coming, their spirits higher than they'd been in years. But as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the hut, Cassie found herself sitting by the fish, a strange feeling tugging at her chest. It didn't move like the fish she'd seen in the river, wild and thrashing when caught. This one swam with a slow, almost careful grace, its golden scales catching the faint light, its eyes deep and oddly sad. She spoke to it softly, her voice half playful, saying how beautiful it was, asking if it could understand her, wondering if it was really meant to be sold or if it was something more. The fish circled the bowl, its movements steady, and she shook her head, telling herself she was being silly. It was just a fish, nothing else. Yet the doubt stayed, a quiet whisper she couldn't hush. At supper, Nah chattered eagerly about what they'd do with the money. New wraps to wear, a store of grain to last through the dry season, maybe even a small plot of land to call their own. Cassie nodded along, forcing a smile, but her mind kept drifting back to the fish, its strange stillness pulling at her thoughts. Later, when the hut grew dark and Nah went to bed, Cassie couldn't sleep. She lit a small lamp, its flame flickering in the quiet, and crept back to the bowl. Kneeling beside it, she whispered a challenge. If it wasn't just a fish, it should show her, give her a sign of who it really was. For a moment, nothing happened, the water still as glass. Then it rippled, though no breeze touched the room, and the fish swam to the surface, locking its shimmering eyes with hers. A faint voice spoke, soft but clear, begging for help. Cassie gasped, her heart racing, and asked who it was. The voice answered, calling itself Adah, saying it had been cursed into this form by someone it trusted, pleading not to be sold, to be helped back to human shape. Before Cassie could ask more, a sound came from the other room, Nah shifting in her sleep, and Cassie quickly dimmed the lamp, hurrying back to her mat, her mind a storm of fear and wonder. At dawn, Nah was up early, humming a tune as she prepared for the market, packing the fish into a smaller bowl and tying a cloth tight over it to keep it hidden. She called to Cassie, her voice bright, saying today was the day their lives would turn around, that they'd finally have enough. Cassie sat, up slowly, her chest heavy with what she knew, unsure how to tell her mother the fish wasn't just a prize but a person trapped by magic. She didn't know how to explain it, didn't know if Nah would even believe her, but the guilt pressed harder as they set out. They walked to the market, the village waking around them, people calling greetings, their eyes lingering on the covered bowl with curiosity. Word had spread fast that Nah had caught something special, and by the time they reached the market, a crowd was waiting, merchants and villagers craning to see. Nah pulled back the cloth, revealing the golden fish, its scales flashing like treasure in the sunlight. Gasps rippled through the air, and the bids started. 50 gold coins from one man, 60 from another, 70 from a third, the numbers climbing higher as voices shouted over each other. Nah's heart raced, her face glowing with joy, but Cassie stood beside her, pale and tense, her hands clenched at her sides. She stepped closer, touching her mother's arm, her voice soft as she begged her to wait. The crowd quieted, confused as Cassie explained. The fish was Adah, a human cursed into this shape. She'd heard her speak the night before, and they couldn't sell her. They had to help her. Laughter broke out, loud and sharp, merchants calling, "It nonsense," a child's wild story. But Nah turned to Cassie, searching her daughter's steady eyes. She saw no lie there, only a quiet certainty. And when she looked at the fish again, its eyes seemed different, almost human. Her hands shook as she clutched the bowl, then raised her voice to the crowd, saying she wouldn't sell, that they were taking it home. Angry shouts followed them as they left, merchants cursing their lost chance. But Nah didn't look back. Later, 3 of those merchants huddled in a shadowed corner of the village, their faces dark with frustration. They weren't ready to let the fish go. It was worth too much, more than they'd ever seen. One, a tall, thin man, suggested they steal it that night, sneak into Nah's hut and take it by force, deal with anyone who got in their way. 2 nodded, their greed outweighing any doubt, but the third hesitated. He remembered Nah helping him, once years back when he'd been hungry and alone, sharing what little she had. Guilt twisted in his gut, and he slipped away, deciding to warn her instead. He reached her hut as the sun dipped low, knocking softly, and when Nah opened the door, he spoke fast, telling her the others were coming, that they'd stop at nothing, that she and Cassie had to leave now or risk everything. Nah's heart sank, but she nodded, grabbing the fish, a small bag of food, and some blankets. She took Cassie's hand, and they slipped out into the fading light, heading for the forest as the village settled into dusk. They moved quietly, their steps muffled by the earth, until they reached the woods, the trees rising tall and dark around them. They walked for hours, the air growing colder until they stumbled on an old hut, its roof thick with moss, its walls cracked but standing. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, far from the danger behind them. They set up inside, laying out their blankets, the sounds of the forest, wind, rustling leaves, a distant owl filling the night. For now, they were safe, though the fish swam silently in its bowl, a reminder of the task ahead. Back in the village, Lamy had taken full hold of the palace, her heart hardened, her will iron. Obi, under the charm's spell, followed her every word, his own mind dulled to anything else. She ruled as if she'd always been queen, her once soft smile now a cold line. One morning, she sent a messenger to Adah's mother, summoning her to the palace. The woman hurried over, thinking it urgent, only to find Lamy on a golden throne, surrounded by servants, demanding she cook the day's meal because the palace cooks weren't to her liking. Adah's mother protested. She was a farmer's wife, not a chef, but Lamy's voice cut sharp, threatening punishment if she refused. Swallowing her pride, the woman worked all day, the other cooks watching in confusion, and when Lamy tasted it, she sneered, calling it barely good enough, ordering her back the next day. The following morning, Lamy sent for Adah's father, commanding him to tend the royal garden, trimming bushes, planting flowers, under the blazing sun. The head gardener tried to stop him, saying they had enough hands, but he shook his head, saying he had no choice, that the queen's word was law. He labored until his back ached and his hands blistered, while villagers whispered about Lamy's cruelty, their voices low with unease. The village chiefs couldn't ignore it anymore. They met in secret, away from prying eyes, agreeing her actions were wrong. She treated people like tools, not neighbors, and it wasn't the way their land should be. They decided to face her, and the next morning they went to the palace, ushered into the grand hall where Lamy sat, a dazzling crown atop her head. The oldest chief stepped forward, bowing low, and spoke carefully, saying they came in peace but had to be honest. Her treatment of the villagers, especially Adah's parents, was unfair, that they'd done nothing to earn it, and they asked her to show mercy. Lamy's face darkened, her eyes narrowing as she stood, her voice booming through the hall. She accused them of disrespect, demanded to know who they thought they were to question her, and cut off their replies with a shout, threatening to banish them if they spoke against her again. The chiefs exchanged looks, fear, and anger mixing in their eyes. But they knew they couldn't fight her, not with Obi under her sway. Defeated, they bowed and left, Lamy watching them go with a cruel twist of her lips, muttering that it was a lesson for anyone who dared challenge her. But her victory wasn't as solid as she thought. Word of her harshness spread, turning respect into resentment among the people who'd once admired her. They called her a tyrant now, not a queen, longing for Adah's return to set things right, while Adah's parents bore their suffering in silence, praying each night for their daughter, hoping she was alive somewhere far from Lamy's reach. Meanwhile, in the forest, Na and Cassie had spent 2 long days in the old hut, the quiet of the day broken by strange night sounds that made Cassie shiver. The golden fish swam in its clay bowl, its scales glowing faintly, a constant presence in their hiding place. Cassie sat with her knees drawn up, her voice soft as she told Na they couldn't stay. Food was running low, and the forest wasn't. Safe forever. Na nodded, worry creasing her face, knowing Cassie was right, but unsure where to turn. If they went back, the merchants might find them. If they stayed, hunger or wild animals could claim them. As they talked, something odd happened. The air in the hut grew cold, and a bright light flared in the doorway. An old woman stepped inside, her hair white as snow, her eyes sparkling like stars, a staff in her hand. Her voice was gentle, but firm as she told them not to fear, that the gods of the land had sent her. Na and Cassie stared, speechless, until Na found her voice, asking who she was. The woman said she was a messenger, that she'd watched over them at night, keeping the forest's dangers at bay, that their good hearts had earned the gods' favor. She knew why they were there, what they wanted, to free the girl in the Fish. Na clutched her chest, tears welling as she asked if it was possible. The woman nodded, saying she could help, but they had to listen closely. She pulled a bundle of glowing leaves from her bag, handing them to Na, and explained they must rub the herb on the fish to start the change. But that alone wouldn't finish it. Obi had to see Adah within 7 days, or she'd stay a fish forever, the spell unbreakable. Na gasped, asking how they'd reach the king, a man they didn't know, in a village they'd never seen. The woman said the gods trusted their courage, pointing them toward Adah's village, warning the journey would be hard, but urging them not to wait. Then she vanished, leaving them alone, the herb warm in Na's hands. They looked at each other, hearts racing, and Cassie spoke first, firm and sure. They had to go, had to try. They packed their few things, the fish, the herb, their blankets, and started through the forest.